Your 20s decide your money fate. Here's how. So, picture this. You're 26 years old, you've got a job, not your dream job, but a decent one. You're making money, probably more than you made at 22, and honestly, life feels okay. You grab coffee every morning, you go out on weekends, you maybe treat yourself to a trip once a year. You're not struggling, not exactly, but you're also not building anything. You check your bank account at the end of the month, and there's just not much there. And you tell yourself, I'll start saving properly next year, when I get that raise, when things settle down. And that right there, that feeling, that exact quiet justification is one of the most financially expensive thoughts a person in their 20s can have. I've spent a lot of time sitting with that thought, actually. My name is Adam, and I honestly spend way too much time thinking about money. Not in an obsessive, spreadsheet every morning kind of way, but more in a why do some people completely transform their financial lives while others spend decades running in place kind of way. It's the psychology of it that gets me. The habits, the tiny invisible decisions, the moments people don't even recognize as turning points. That stuff fascinates me. And here's what I've come to believe, after all of that thinking and reading and watching people I know, including myself, navigate their financial lives. Your 20s are not just a warm-up act. They are not a casual rehearsal before the real financial decisions begin. They are, in a very concrete and almost unfair way, the decade that quietly determines your financial trajectory for the next 40 years. Now, I know that sounds heavy, maybe even a little alarming, but here's the thing. I don't say that to scare you. I say it because understanding this early enough actually gives you an enormous advantage, because the flip side of your 20s decide your money fate is that your 20s are also the most powerful window you will ever have to build wealth, and most people don't realize that until it's mostly closed. So in this video, we're going to walk through the real reasons why this decade matters so much, and not in a generic start a Roth IRA kind of way. We're going to dig into the habits, the psychology, the compounding effects of small decisions, and the specific traps that are almost perfectly designed to catch people in their 20s off guard. By the end of this, I want you to see your financial life not as a series of isolated choices, but as a living, breathing system, one that you can actually understand and shape. All right, let's get into it. The compound effect is real, and it's working against you right now if you're not using it. Let me start with the concept that everybody's heard of, but almost nobody truly feels in their gut: compound interest. Now, before you zone out because you've heard this 100 times, stay with me, because I want to approach this differently. Most people explain compound interest as a math concept. I want to explain it as a time concept, because the real magic and the real cruelty of compounding isn't the numbers, it's the years. Here's a story. I have a friend, Louis. Great guy, super smart, works in tech. When we were both around 24, I started putting away a small amount every month into an index fund. Nothing dramatic. We're talking maybe $200 a month. Louis, at the time, was in full live your best life mode. Not irresponsible, just not thinking about it yet. He had that same I'll get serious later mindset. He started investing at 34, putting in $400 a month, twice what I was putting in. You'd think he'd catch up, right? Double the contribution, he must close the gap. He didn't. By the time we're both 65, the math shows that my smaller, earlier investment likely grows into a significantly larger sum than his, even though he invested more money in total. Why? Because the years I had that he didn't are irreplaceable. The returns on returns on returns. That early compounding created a gap that doubling his monthly contribution couldn't fully close. That's not a math trick, that's just time. And it's the reason your 20s are uniquely powerful in a way that your 30s, 40s, and 50s simply cannot replicate. Now here's the actionable piece. You don't need to start with a lot. Honestly, starting with something small, even $50 or $100 a month, and being consistent is far more powerful than waiting until you have enough to invest meaningfully. The biggest financial mistake in your 20s isn't investing too little, it's waiting.
Every year you delay is a year of compounding you can never get back. Open the account, start small, let time do the work. Your lifestyle inflates before you even notice it. Okay, let me paint another picture because this one is sneaky and it gets almost everyone. You're 23, fresh out of college, you're making $38,000 a year, and you're honestly fine. You've got a modest apartment, you cook most of your meals, you split streaming services with your roommates. Life is simple and, weirdly, kind of fun. Then you get a raise, maybe a new job. Now you're making $55,000. And almost immediately, not because you sat down and made a deliberate choice, your life gets more expensive. A better apartment, more dinners out, a car upgrade, nicer clothes, a gym with a sauna, and then another raise happens, and the cycle repeats. By 29, you're making $75,000 and somehow saving less than you did at $38,000. This is what's called lifestyle inflation, and it is one of the most silently destructive financial patterns of the 20s because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like progress. It feels like you're enjoying the fruits of your hard work, which, look, you should enjoy your money. I'm not here to tell you to live like a monk, but there's a difference between intentional enjoyment and unconscious escalation. The trap is that lifestyle inflation scales with income almost automatically. Your expenses expand to fill your earnings like air filling a room. And the result is that your savings rate, the percentage of your income you're actually keeping and building with, stays flat or even shrinks even as you earn more. The fix here is something called paying yourself first, and it's genuinely one of the most powerful habits you can build in your 20s. Before your money hits your lifestyle, before it becomes rent and restaurants and online shopping, you automate a portion of it to go directly to savings or investments. You make saving the default, not the afterthought. You decide in advance what percentage of every raise you'll keep for building wealth versus let flow into lifestyle. A simple rule that I like, every time your income increases, commit at least 50% of that increase to savings or investments before your lifestyle has a chance to claim it. It's not about deprivation. It's about being intentional before the money disappears into thin air.
Debt in your 20s is a different animal than most people realize. Let's talk about debt, because this is a chapter where a lot of people in their 20s are carrying something heavy and not fully understanding what it's doing to their future. Student loans are the obvious one. And look, I'm not here to moralize about whether college was worth it or whether the system is broken, because honestly, that's a whole other conversation. What I want to focus on is the mathematical reality of carrying high-interest debt while also trying to build wealth, because those two things are essentially working against each other simultaneously. Think of it this way. Debt with a high interest rate, let's say credit card debt at 20%, is like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. You pour money in from the top, you save, you invest, you build. But the drain is pulling money out the whole time through interest payments. The net progress is far slower than it looks. Now, not all debt is equal. A low-interest student loan at 4% is a very different situation than credit card debt at 22%. And this is where people sometimes get confused. They treat all debt with the same anxiety, or conversely, they're weirdly relaxed about all of it. The strategy that actually works is prioritizing debt by interest rate. High interest debt, typically anything above roughly 7 or 8%, should be paid off aggressively before you invest heavily, because you won't reliably earn more than 8% in the market year over year, so paying off that debt first is essentially a guaranteed return. Low interest debt, on the other hand, can coexist with investing. You don't need to be debt-free before you start building wealth. But here's the thing about debt in your 20s that goes beyond the math. Debt carries a psychological weight. It creates a ceiling on your risk tolerance, your freedom to change jobs, your willingness to start something new. The person who's carrying $30,000 in credit card debt and a car loan is not as free to make bold career moves as someone who isn't. That invisible ceiling costs people in ways that don't show up in a spreadsheet. Getting aggressive about eliminating high-interest debt in your 20s isn't just a financial strategy, it's a freedom strategy. The career decisions you make now compound too, and most people forget this. Here's something I don't think gets said enough in personal finance spaces. Your income is your most powerful wealth building tool, and the decisions you make in your 20s about your career have a compounding effect that rivals anything in investing. Let me explain what I mean. If you're 25 and you negotiate your salary, really push for it, do the research, make the ask, and you get $5,000 more per year than you would have otherwise, that's not just $5,000 once. That $5,000 becomes your baseline. Your next raise is calculated from it. Your next job offer is benchmarked against it. Over a 40-year career, that single negotiation could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. People in their 20s are terrified of negotiating. I get it. I was too. There's this fear that if you ask for more, you'll seem greedy, or they'll rescind the offer, or they'll think less of you. But the data is pretty clear. Most hiring managers expect negotiation. It's part of the process. And the cost of not negotiating over a lifetime is enormous. Beyond negotiation, there's the question of which skills you invest in building during this decade. Your 20s are genuinely the best time to develop high-value skills because you have fewer competing obligations, fewer family responsibilities, more mental energy, more willingness to grind. The skills you build now don't just determine your next job. They determine your earning trajectory for the next 20 years. Lewis, my friend I mentioned earlier, he did something really smart in his mid-20s. Instead of staying comfortable in his existing role, he spent about 18 months deliberately building skills in an emerging area of his field. Took courses, did side projects, made himself uncomfortable. His income over the following decade grew at a rate that people in similar roles who didn't do that simply didn't experience. Same industry, different trajectory, all because of an 18-month investment in a skill that the market suddenly valued. Here's a takeaway. Treat your career like an investment portfolio in your 20s. Diversify your skills. Negotiate relentlessly and without apology. Seek out environments where you're learning, not just earning, because your income potential is the engine, and everything else, the saving, the investing, the compound growth, is downstream of it.
The emergency fund you don't have is a wealth destroyer. This one is a little less glamorous than talk of investing and compounding, but honestly, it might be the most practically important thing in this whole video for people in their 20s. Most people in their 20s don't have a real emergency fund. And by real, I mean 3 to 6 months of living expenses sitting in a separate, boring, high-yield savings account that you genuinely don't touch. Instead, people have a vague sense that they could figure it out if something went wrong. Maybe they'd put it on a credit card. Maybe they'd borrow from family. Maybe they'd cash out their tiny investment account. Here's why this destroys wealth in a way people don't fully appreciate. Life in your 20s is, statistically, pretty unpredictable. Your car breaks down. You get sick and have medical bills. You lose your job. And this happens to people at every income level. You have a sudden move, a broken lease, an unexpected expense that comes out of nowhere and costs you $2,000 you don't have sitting around. Without an emergency fund, what happens? You go into debt, high interest debt usually, and then you spend the next 6 to 12 months paying that off, derailing whatever savings momentum you'd built. Or you sell investments at the worst possible time to cover costs. Or the financial stress starts affecting your work, your sleep, your relationships. The emergency fund isn't exciting. It doesn't compound like an investment. It just sits there, doing nothing for months or even years. But what it's actually doing is protecting every other financial goal you have from being wiped out by life being unpredictable, which it always is. Build this first. Before you aggressively invest, before you think about anything sophisticated, get to a point where you have a real cushion. Even starting with 1 month's worth of expenses is dramatically better than nothing. Make it automatic, separate account, out of sight, out of mind, until you genuinely need it. The social pressure to spend is the most underrated financial enemy of your 20s. Okay, I want to spend some real time on this one because I think it's one of the most honest conversations we can have about money in your 20s, and a lot of people skip over it because it feels uncomfortable to say out loud. Your social environment in your 20s is, and I mean this with full seriousness, one of the most powerful determinants of your financial outcome. Think about it. Your 20s are intensely social. Everyone's going out, traveling, celebrating, upgrading, and there's this invisible current in every friend group that pulls your spending in a certain direction. The group trip to Europe, the regular nice dinners, the constant flow of birthday parties, weddings, events, experiences. And none of it feels like overspending because everyone around you is doing the same thing. There's a concept in behavioral economics called social comparison, and it basically says that humans are wired to calibrate their spending not against their actual needs, but against what the people around them are doing. Which means if your social circle spends lavishly, your normal quietly becomes their normal. And that's an expensive normal to maintain on an entry-level or mid-level salary. I remember being 25 and feeling genuinely stressed that I couldn't keep up with the social cadence around me, without knowing that's what I was feeling. I'd go to a dinner I didn't really want to spend money on, or join a trip that stretched my budget, and I'd tell myself it was fine, it was worth it, it was important for the relationship. And sometimes it was. But sometimes, honestly, it was just peer pressure wearing a very sophisticated disguise. The actionable piece here isn't to become a financial hermit and refuse to do anything fun. It's to build what I'd call a spending identity. Know clearly before you're in the moment what you genuinely value spending money on and what you're just doing because of social gravity. If travel is something that brings you real joy and meaning, protect that budget category. But be honest about what's actually lighting you up versus what's just keeping you in step with everyone else. There's also a version of this that works proactively. Being open with even one or two close friends about being intentional with money can completely shift the dynamic. You'd be surprised how many people in your circle are secretly relieved when someone says, "Hey, can we do something cheaper this time?" You might not be the only one feeling the pressure.
Retirement feels fake at 25, but not funding it is the real fantasy. Let me be really straight with you about something that sounds so far away it barely registers as real when you're 24 or 25. Retirement accounts are not for old people. They are, structurally, the most powerful wealth-building vehicle available to most people, and their power is almost entirely dependent on starting young, which means they are fundamentally for young people. And yet, almost nobody treats them that way. Here's the basic reality. If your employer offers a 401k match, meaning they'll match a percentage of what you contribute, and you're not contributing at least enough to capture the full match, you are, without overstating it, leaving free money on the table every single month. That match is part of your compensation. Declining it is like declining part of your salary. Beyond the employer match, accounts like a Roth IRA, where you contribute after-tax money and it grows completely tax-free, are genuinely extraordinary tools for young earners. You pay taxes now, while your income and tax rate are probably lower than they'll ever be, and then decades of growth come out completely tax-free. The IRS is essentially letting you build wealth in a protected space, and the earlier you start filling that space, the more it holds. I know retirement feels abstract in your 20s. When you're 24, 65 years old might as well be a different dimension. But here's the mental reframe that actually helped me. Don't think of it as saving for when you're old. Think of it as building a financial foundation that gives future you options. Maybe you retire early. Maybe you take a year off at 45 to do something you love. Maybe you fund your kids' education. The account doesn't care what you use it for eventually. It just needs time and consistency to grow into something meaningful. Even starting with the contribution amount that captures your full employer match and then increasing by 1% every year is a trajectory that will leave most people in a dramatically better position than the majority of their peers. The gap between those who started at 24 and those who started at 34 is not a gap that hard work and good intentions in your 40s can reliably close. Start now with whatever you have. The smallest consistent contribution beats the largest theoretical one that never actually begins. The relationship between money and your identity, the one nobody talks about. Okay, I want to go somewhere a little deeper for a minute because I think there's something underneath all these financial habits and strategies that doesn't get talked about enough. Your relationship with money in your 20s is being shaped constantly, quietly, by your identity, by how you see yourself, by what you believe deep down you deserve, what's possible for you,
whether wealthy people are fundamentally different from you or just people who made different choices. And here's the uncomfortable thing. A lot of people carry money stories from childhood that are actively working against them as adults. If you grew up in a household where money was always tight, where stress and scarcity were the emotional background of every financial conversation, you might have internalized the belief that scarcity is just your reality, that building real wealth is for other people, that you shouldn't want too much. Or conversely, if you grew up watching parents spend freely and emotionally, money might feel like something that flows in and flows out and isn't really meant to be accumulated. It's just for now, for feelings, for the moment. Neither of those stories is a life sentence, but they do have to be named before they can be changed. I had a version of this myself, a voice that would pop up whenever I started making real progress financially that would say things like, "Don't get too comfortable," or "This won't last," like success was temporary by default, and prudence was somehow arrogant. It took me a while to realize that voice wasn't wisdom, it was just an old fear wearing a very convincing mask. The work here isn't therapy necessarily, though that can help. It's awareness. It's asking yourself, genuinely, what do I actually believe about money, about what I deserve, about whether wealth is achievable for someone like me? Because the answers to those questions are running your financial behavior more than any spreadsheet is. When you start to see your money habits as expressions of your identity and beliefs, rather than just choices, you can start making changes that actually stick, because you're not fighting behavior, you're updating beliefs. The power of one good financial habit scaled over time. I want to close the body of this video with something that I think is genuinely hopeful, because I'm aware that we've covered a lot of heavy ground, and I don't want you to walk away from this feeling overwhelmed or behind. Here's the truth about building wealth in your 20s. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You don't need to optimize every dollar, master every investment vehicle, and never make a financial mistake. Nobody does that. Nobody. What you need is one good habit, truly internalized, truly consistent, and time. The research on wealth building is pretty clear that consistent behavior over time vastly outperforms sporadic optimization. The person who saves $200 automatically every month for 30 years without drama and without missing a month will almost always build more wealth than the person who saves $1,000 one month, nothing for 3 months, $500 another month, and then panics during a market dip and pulls everything out. Consistency is the superpower, and your 20s are the perfect decade to build it, because habits formed young are habits that stick. Pick one, just one to start. Maybe it's automating a savings transfer on payday. Maybe it's capturing your employer match. Maybe it's setting a monthly budget check-in, just 20 minutes once a month to look at where your money went and whether that lines up with what you actually care about. Maybe it's committing to negotiate your salary at your next review. One habit, built consistently. That's genuinely enough to start. The momentum from that one thing will naturally pull others into orbit around it. Lewis, by the way, my friend who started investing later, he did eventually build something meaningful. Not as much as he would have had he started earlier, but he got serious, he got consistent, and he's on a real trajectory now. The point was never that people who don't start at 22 are doomed. The point is that every year earlier you start, the easier it gets. And every year you wait, it gets a little harder. But harder is not impossible, and later is infinitely better than never. Conclusion. So let's come back to where we started. That 26-year-old checking their bank account at the end of the month, watching their earnings quietly evaporate, telling themselves next year when things settle down. I want you to feel something different about that image now. Not guilt. Guilt is useless here. But recognition. Recognition that the choices happening right now, in this decade, are not neutral. They are not a rehearsal. They are the foundation. And whether it's a strong one or a shaky one depends almost entirely on what you do with the awareness you now have. The things we talked about today, the irreplaceable power of compound growth, the invisible creep of lifestyle inflation, the psychological weight of debt, the career as a compounding asset, the emergency fund as a wealth protector, the retirement accounts that are built for young people precisely because of time, the money stories that shape behavior below the surface, and the quiet, unstoppable power of one good, consistent habit, These aren't abstract principles. They're forces that are operating in your life right now, whether you're paying attention to them or not. And that's the thing, right? They're already happening. The question is whether you're directing them or they're directing you. Your 20s will pass. They pass faster than almost anyone believes possible while they're inside them. And when they do, the financial position you're in will be a direct reflection of the habits, the decisions, and the awareness you carried through this decade. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with intention. You don't need to be a finance expert. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to take this seriously, today. Not next year, not when things feel more settled, because things rarely settle. Life just keeps moving, and the people who build real financial lives are the ones who decide to begin inside the uncertainty, not after it. Start small, start now, and trust that small, consistent, intentional things over the years this decade gives you add up to something genuinely extraordinary. You've got time. Use it.